Actually, it's a worldwide epidemic. It's in Japan, in Korea, in Thailand, it's all over the world. Nobody is escaping it. In terms of groups of people, I sometimes hear, you know, oh, maybe intellectuals suffer more from that, or, you know, people have certain views of who is suffering more, and the truth is all groups are affected. Farmers, politicians, you know, like I'm thinking, of course, of Reagan in this country, but recently a former French president was also diagnosed, Jacques Chirac, diagnosed with Alzheimer's as well. So it's really across the board. In that sense, it's a very democratic disease. So the common questions that I would like to address right away to get out of the way is, what is the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's? For the purpose of this lecture, it does not really matter very much. But let's say technically, Alzheimer's is a form of dementia. So that means it's actually 60% of the dementia. And the characteristics of Alzheimer's are a slow decline of memory and, you know, changes of behavior, and, you know, the wandering off. These are some of the symptoms that define Alzheimer's. Dementia, on the other hand, can happen suddenly. Like, for example, there's what's called vascular dementia, which is something that happens right after a stroke. Or you can have a dementia associated, let's say, with after an accident, after a trauma. Or you can have, like, for example, Parkinson's disease can lead to dementia. So that means it does not start with a slow decline of memory. So, but really, it's the same type of characteristics, it's just they don't develop and don't happen quite the same way, okay? Is Alzheimer's part of aging? Is it fatalistic and unavoidable, which is something I found in several Western reviews. So is it part of aging? Well, obviously no, meaning there are many people, thank God, who do not get Alzheimer's or dementia when they get old. And then a question that sometimes is asked is, well, is it because our society is aging? You know, we have more elder people, so maybe there's more Alzheimer's just because we have more elder people. But that's not true, because in each group, like let's say, for example, the 60 to 65 years old, each group, there is an increase. So it's not just the number of people, it's a proportion that's increasing and seems to be increasing more and more, right? Is it genetic? That's another thing that is often thought or asked, and the answer is no. Actually, even considering Western definitions, they consider that about 1% could be considered really genetic, and less than 5% has a tendency, you know, meaning that even in that 5% of people who might have a genetic predisposition, not everybody gets it. So there's about 1% that's considered strictly genetic. And by and large, it is not a genetic disease, all right? Is it irreversible? So I would like to, I'll come back to that later, but the question is open in terms of when you can act on the disease. Certainly the brain is very flexible. There's actually a term for that, which is neuroplasticity, which is until recently, scientists thought that the brain was declining and decaying with age. But in the last decade, it's been found that the brain is constantly creating new neurons. And that the name given to that is neuroplasticity, meaning the brain is constantly creating new pathways and new neurons. So that's extremely helpful and hopeful, meaning that as we age, and I remember, for those of you who are into macrobiotic, that, you know, George Osawa used to say that we should have a better and better memory as we grow older because we use it more and more. And actually, with modern research, that is validated, meaning if we don't suffer from a disease, our memory should not decline. Our brain is constantly creating new pathways, and the more we use it, and the more those pathways can develop. So that's very hopeful, right? So the characteristics of Alzheimer's are memory loss, what is called narcolepsy, meaning, falling asleep suddenly in the middle of a sentence, or we're not just talking about dozing off after a heavy meal, but loss of language skills, changes in behavior, and in particular, a certain aggressivity, which is why it's so hard for caretakers very often. There's often, some anger or some aggressivity that comes out. There can be also a loss of sense of time and day and disorientation. Now, one thing I'd like to say before we keep on going is that in the research that some of which I'm going to share with you of Western medicine, I think it's really wonderful, the kind of exquisite detail that science is coming up with in terms of the functioning of the brain cells and the processes of the brain cells is just really amazing. And the problem, though, is that it's like very often when I would read some of the books for this project, it was so exciting to find, about neuroplasticity and, all this incredible research. But then I always end up disappointed at the end, because it's like when you come to conclusions, it's like, okay, what conclusions can we draw from that? It's like that's where most Western scientists become, I would say, almost paralyzed, because they cannot say anything that's too simple. So if they come, let's say, and we're going to share some of that, a relationship between food, obviously, and the disease, it's like they say, well, that might be helpful, even though, all along you find really a lot of evidence. But, there's that tendency in our modern society today, and the scientific community in particular, you cannot be too simple. It just won't do. You have to come up. So they're great as long as it's complex and the details. But when it comes to conclusion, it's like, okay, well, we need more research, we need more studies, and we need to find a medication. That's always the conclusion. So you will see, actually, I hope to show you what I mean by that, because all along the research for this, that's what I found constantly is the gap between the research and then, well, isn't that an obvious conclusion? But they don't want to go there because it's too simple. All right. So on the side of hope for memory, one study that was done that is very interesting was 3 groups of people. They wanted to see how are we affected by the beliefs we carry about memory and aging. So they chose 3 groups, and I'm not quite sure on what basis for each one of them, but one was Chinese people, a group of Chinese people, because China has great reverence for elder people. And actually I lived in Japan for 6 years, and I met personally several people who told me how excited they were to get older, because they were going to get the respect from the younger generation. And it certainly is the same thing in China. Their great reverence. I know I was surprised, for example, to see that they were hiring teachers until 75 to 80 years old. If you were able to, you could find a job teaching. So they chose Chinese people for the reverence that they have for older people. And then they chose a group of deaf Americans. And that's interesting because deaf people apparently also do not share, maybe because they're more visual in there, I'm not quite sure, but they don't share many of the beliefs about old age and memory. So that was the second group. And the third group was a group of regular Americans. And so they gave them all kinds of problems. Let me go back. All kinds of problems to solve linked to memory. And they came up with the fact that the belief system was extremely important in the way people performed. And Chinese people in particular were able to perform just as well as the younger people. So that was one of the studies cited as showing that our belief system plays a tremendous part in what happens also. So of course I think that right now, and that's what I hope to do a little bit here, is to dispel that sense of doom. Like, because if we carry that, you know, when we are terrorized at the thought of getting older because it might happen, that's part of a belief system too. So we certainly need to get as informed as we can on the hopeful side, all right? So another study showed that the focus on past events, which is something that happens a lot in old age, and sometimes we worry about that, you know, like it might be a sign of Alzheimer's. People seem to recall more, you know, the past, far away past, but have less memory of more recent events. And basically, what they found in terms of research on the brain is that it's no more work for the brain to recall recent events than it is to recall faraway events. So basically what that showed was that the reason why people lose memory of recent events as they get older is simply a loss of interest. You know, meaning that very often we associate our best times with, you know, being younger and handsome and, you know, pretty and all of that. So that there tends to be a focus on youth and events from the youth, and not very much attention, you know, which can be part of some depression, not much attention to more recent events. But when the interest is there, when there is the same enthusiasm to the recent past, then the memory of past, of, you know, recall of recent memory is just as good. Okay. And the third one, on terms of hope, was what I mentioned before about neuroplasticity. So, you know, we often are told, and scientifically, that we only use about 10% of our brain. So imagine 10%, that's really little, right? So there's 90% to discover. So that's what the latest research seems to go in that direction, where that actually the brain, if it's stimulated enough, keeps creating new pathways. That's hopeful too, right? So let's look, before we go look at the disease, at what a healthy brain is. What does it look like? So here is one. So as you see, it looks a little bit like a walnut, kind of, right? And that's funny too, because walnuts in the pharmacopoeia of Chinese medicine are considered to be a food for the brain. And so in Chinese medicine school, many of my schoolmates would just bring, you know, bags of walnuts and eat them before exams, you know. However, I don't know about raw nuts is more a problem as opposed to cooked nuts. But anyway, you can see the relationship, you know, the theory of signatures. So walnut is considered a brain food in Chinese medicine, right? But cooked, right, not raw. So it's soft. It's a bit like a sponge, right? And it's very full, very dense. And if the brain is healthy, you know, we have a bit, there are different parts of the brain. The back is a little bit more related to the past. I forget my tech tools here. Present, and more future is more the front of the brain. Here are some more pictures of the brain. I love this one. It kind of looks like a frog, doesn't it? And I don't know if frogs are a good brain food. And the different parts of the brain. And what I'd like you to notice is especially this part. We'll come back to that in a moment. This part, which is called the hippocampus, because lots of the first signs of Alzheimer's come in that area of the brain. And here it is, the hippocampus. I don't know if you would say hippocampus or hippocampus. Yeah, hippocampus. So it's called hippocampus, which here means horse, because it looks like a seahorse, you see? And it's right in the middle of the brain, and that's where the first plaques, the first disorders happen in Alzheimer's. Some more of the brain. So the back is called the cerebellum, and then this is the cerebral cortex, the envelope, and as Alzheimer's progresses, it tends to reach more the periphery and the outside of the brain. And I'd like to bring attention to a little gland that we have inside the brain, which is the pineal gland, which sometimes is called the gland of light, and plays a big part in occult studies, in terms of developing the pineal gland and the third eye. But here, what interests me more here is that the pineal gland is very prone to calcification as we get older, meaning it gets calcified, it gets hard, meaning it gets little stones, just like the gallbladder or the kidneys. Interesting, isn't it? And the brain functions, here, there are many theories about various aspects of the brain, so I don't want to go there. That's a rather traditional model, but basically you can see that the part around the hippocampus has to do with memory. So this is the part that's usually affected first. Okay? All right, so let's go now to the side of Chinese medicine. The brain in Chinese medicine is called the sea of marrow. All right? And it's very interesting. The word itself is interesting, right? Sea of marrow. So that means that in the Chinese medicine concept, there is that image of the importance of fluids. You could say fat also, but it's the brain and the spine. It's the marrow is what fills the bone, the spine, and the brain. It's a bit different from the concept of bone marrow in Western medicine. So it's that fluid type that is, as we saw in the softness of the brain. And it's seen to be very connected to the kidneys, right? So one way of looking at it would be like the kidneys would be the water, the ocean of our body. The reserve of water. And so a lot of that goes up to the spine and to the brain and fills the spine and the brain. So that means that in the Chinese medicine concept, the health of the brain is very dependent on the health of the kidney. Right? We talked about kidney essence, the essence of the kidneys as nourishing the brain. So for example, a child who is born with autism, in Chinese medicine, part of the diagnosis would be deficiency of kidney essence. Okay? So you could say with the name sea of marrow, a concept that the brain is very dependent on the yin of the body, right? The yin part of the body. But at the same time, it needs the yang of the body, yin and yang. It's familiar to most of you, right? It needs also the strength to go up and fill the brain. Right? So there's a need, the substance that the brain gets nourished from is very yin, but it also needs this upward movement, which is more yang. Yeah? So let's, and right now I would like to kind of put a few things together, and then we'll get to some conclusions from that. Let's look at what a healthy brain needs. And here it does not take a very much to know, which is a healthy brain needs, first of all, blood, right? Sea of marrow, so it's very dependent on the liquids, on the fluids of the body. So it's very related, therefore, to the heart, because the heart governs blood. Here, that's Chinese medicine. And also to the digestive system, because, of course, the quality of our blood comes from our digestive system. Yes? Following? The other thing that a healthy brain needs is glucose, right, for good energy. So that means spleen, stomach play a big part in the we would say Western. This is a bit mixing Chinese and Western medicine. In Chinese medicine, spleen and stomach are the center of the sweet taste, right? So glucose, in Western terms, we would say more insulin and pancreas, right? Very strong connection. So there needs to be good nutrition coming to the brain. And finally, it needs oxygen, which, of course, our lungs and sinuses play a big part for that. Our respiration plays a big part. And then it also needs good fat and water. Yes? Following so far? So in Chinese medicine terms, what the brain needs is good body fluids, including the blood, a good quality of body fluids, good substances, good blood. It also needs more yang. So the way we look at that in the Chinese medicine model is the functions of the brain, the functioning of the brain is a very subtle activity. So you could say it's pure yang. You know, like we say that the fact that our eyes can see, that our nose can smell, that our ears can hear, this is pure yang. This is a very subtle function. Okay? But all these very pure yang functions are very much dependent on the quality of the substances in the body. The yin, the body fluids, the water, the metabolism of making substances. And that's all I'm going to go into there right now. All right. So memory in Chinese medicine is actually related to three main systems. And that's a very interesting concept, I think. There are three types of memory in the Chinese medicine model. One related to the heart, to the functions of the heart. But again, the Chinese medicine concept of heart. And so the heart would be related to our consciousness, being able to have, our talents, our personality being radiant, being the kind of radiance we have in the world, our total consciousness. That's the shen, that's the heart. And so the memory of the heart is what makes us be ourselves every day. The total of our personality, our ability to function, our ability to decide, to choose, everything that has to do with everyday life and being ourselves. That's heart. The second one is memory that is related to the spleen. And the memory that's related to the spleen has to do more with digestion. So digestion of foods, but also digestion of facts. So that's the learning that we do, how we study and remember. So students, and there are a few here tonight, they need to have good spleen memory, meaning that's the intellect, the ability to study and then make it our own, making our own wisdom. Just like when we digest food, it becomes our own flesh, right? So that's the memory associated with the spleen, is our apprenticeship and our ability to learn facts. And then finally, there is the memory of the kidney, which is more the deep memory. You could say instinct is part of it. DNA would be part of it. You know, we can say we have, of course, a genetic memory in the color of our eyes, in the color of our hair. That's a deep kidney memory. So you could say generational, cultural memory, instinctual memory has to do with kidney memory. Okay? And when I say heart, spleen, and kidney, I'm not going to go into that obviously tonight, but that's more than just the organ. It's more of a system. So let's look now what happens with a diseased brain. These are pictures of different, that's a healthy brain, mild Alzheimer's, so you can see how it gets a bit shrunk. And what happens is basically the connection